3, 2, 1.
This is The Jungle, an up-close, unvarnished look inside leadership and business strategy. We wade into the real-world leader's face and explore what they do to create a path forward, because that's what business is. Wild, exciting.
It's The Jungle.
Derek, welcome back to The Jungle.
Welcome back to you, Doug. It's great to be here.
So I think we don't need to even have banter today, given the illustriousness of our guest. So we're just going to start right there for folks out there listening. So we had the great honor of having the head coach of the Detroit Red Wings, Coach Blash, join us on the podcast today. And Coach Blash has had unbelievable success across so many different levels of hockey, going back to success in the American Hockey League, a great coaching stint here at Western, and then also was a player at Ferris. And Derek, I know that you guys, you and Coach Blash overlapped at your time at Ferris. You have a good Blash story for us.
Well, we talked in the podcast about no sharing stories about each other because it wouldn't do either of us well from college. But yeah, Coach Blash, we had a short overlap stint at Ferris. I've known him for a long time. We're not great friends, but I see him, once a year at some outings and stuff. Fantastic person. He was actually a volunteer assistant coach, graduate assistant coach when I showed up at Ferris as a freshman. That obviously put him in a difficult situation as his first coaching role, having to coach players he just played with. But seeing it, you could see him at that time, that he was dialed. He was really focused and energized and wanted to be a great coach, and watching him grow through all of his stops and juniors and the minors, and with USA Hockey, he's done a lot to help with USA Hockey. It's just been great to see. And, we run into him every now and then. It's great to catch up, and he's always, to see his growth has been nothing short of amazing.
Is he a better golfer than you when you go to the golf outing?
I don't think so. No, and I haven't played in the group with him, but I think I could take Blash. Almost positive.
Okay.
We last time I was there, we won. We won the Ferris Golf Outing last time I was there. I'll shout out to Trevor Large, Nick Shively, and then obviously my brother was with us, so that made it much easier for the rest of us.
I was going to say, it was your brother won it, you mean? Not
Correct. Chad won it for us. We were just there having a good time and catching up with old friends, but yeah.
So amazing podcast today. So many great lessons and really great lessons on that we can see on how you lead and are effective in sports and the translation to effective leadership in business. So what were your takeaways there, Derek?
Well, that's hard because a lot of people will say, well, there's no relation between sports and business. And we see this even in some high level management academic type journals, right? There's sports publications that show that there's a connection, and then you're going to say, well, how does this relate to business now? And there are some differences. There's definitely some differences. And Jeff talked about that. He'd never pretend to be someone he's not. He's a hockey coach. But talk about great leadership lessons from in a 30-minute podcast. I think he's maybe been one of our best in all the stuff he talked about. Really good. If you ever want to bring someone in to have a conversation about leadership and the stuff he's been through, Blash would be a great person to bring in. And one of the things I'll take away, or my takeaway from Coach Blash, is direct and honest. He's always direct and honest with people. He thinks communication is important, but it has to be direct and honest. Everyone has to know where they stand, and everyone has to know, and his leaders always let him know where he stands. I think having that direct and honest communication is critical. And he said it's probably one of the most important things, and he put it in a really good way, which I liked, which we should adopt. You want to make sure everyone that the people management side, everyone you're working with, is on a path to greatness, and we're on that path to greatness, and they're doing great things. You want to let them know and be direct and honest about that. And when they're not on that path to greatness, you want to let them know that they're no longer on that path to greatness and that they've got to adjust. And that's what the direct and honesty's comes from. And so I thought that was a great takeaway. It's hard to be direct and honest. Those conversations can be hard. It's challenging, but as a leader, that's your job. So that was my takeaway. I thought that can go straight to business, and it was really good. What was your takeaway, Doug?
I mean, it's building off this idea of direct and honest, but how you actually manifest that in the style. And he talked about you be inspiration and kind of being hard, being tough are opposites ends of a continuum and we see this a lot with leaders that they need to be really effective in different situations, and whatever the situation calls for is the style you need to go with. I mean, some days it's the rah-rah. Some days it's down in the details, no emotion. Some days it's a little bit tougher. And you often see leaders get pigeonholed into a style. My favorite analogy here is, you see a George Clooney movie. It's like George Clooney is always George Clooney. But some of those actors, Meryl Streep, she's just like a fundamentally different character each time. And I think that ability to have a broad repertoire that you can match the situation depending on your style, really, really, really critical. Difficult to do, but building that is I think a pathway to great, helping people achieve greatness.
Well, and I think that's every leader's job. You have to be authentic in it in your own way, but there's some situations that are going to call for you to be hard, right? And there's some situations that the team's going to need motivation, and you've got to be able to do both. And you've got to, one of the hard things is deciding when inspiration is needed and when the difficult, hard conversations are needed with people. And they're both effective in different situations. So I totally agree with you, Doug. That was a great takeaway. So a lot of good stuff in this podcast. Really,
really good podcast episode. Their Red Wings are kicking off the season. So a real timely episode, I think, as well. We hope all the listeners really enjoyed this episode with Coach Blash, head coach of the Detroit Red Wings.
The Jungle is produced by the Center for Principled Leadership and Business Strategy in Western Michigan University's Hayworth College of Business. Our center supports the leadership and business strategy major, conducts large-scale consulting projects, and trains professionals in acquiring and operating small businesses. To learn more, visit wmich.edu/leadership center.
Coach Blash, welcome to the Jungle.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, guys. I appreciate the opportunity.
Do you have a beverage there with you? Cheers.
I do. I have a Dasani water.
A little hydration in the morning. Excellent.
Yes.
Where's this podcast finding you these days?
I'm actually in my office at LCA, Little Caesars Arena. So I haven't spent tons of time here, but I am here today. So sometimes it's been my new office in our basement that isn't an office, and sometimes it's been a little bit of time at LCA.
Excellent. Well, it's funny. We were
probably nice new rink there.
Oh, the rink's unreal, guys. If you haven't been here, it's as nice a building as you can have. I can't wait till we can get people back in this building.
So is the building as good as the building back at Ferris? Because I didn't know that you and Derek had this connection, and we were actually trading stories with you or with Derek beforehand, and we were like, "Oh, what story we're going to tell?" And so Derek had one of those stories. We had to select a story. But Derek has a good story, I think.
Yeah, podcast is PG, so I had to keep the story up above board. But so here's a story. If this is true, and this is why we invited you on a business podcast. Vince Owen, you remember Vince?
Oh, yeah.
So VO used to complain after you graduated about having to room with you because you would watch CNBC all day in the room. Is that true?
That's first of all, I'm disappointed Vince has never told me that. That's what I'm disappointed about. So yeah. I don't know if it was CNBC. I think he might have made that part of it up. But, it's funny. I even as a kid, I'll tell you, I just never watched. I don't remember watching a whole bunch of cartoons and a whole bunch of stuff like that. I probably have too much. My wife would say too much of a serious side. I can have fun, but my wife would tell me I'm way too serious. So that probably is true. But I am disappointed. This is the first I've heard of it.
Yeah, Vince used to complain. I still remember it. He used to complain about it on the road trips after you graduated. But that's awesome. And getting a new roommate. But he's pretty straight up. I'm surprised he didn't tell you that anyway.
I know. Vince isn't afraid to tell me anything. He's told me lots of things. How bad a goalie I was, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
I thought this might devolve into just hockey story, old hockey stories, and all of our listeners could hear what Derek was maybe like, back in his younger days. I know all of our students, when they see the hockey pictures and the longer hair, the story, the imagination start running wild with the students, So
yeah, I won't divulge any stories about Derek if he doesn't about me. So I think there's probably I don't think either one of us would gain anything from telling stories about each other when we were in college.
There you go. There you go. So, Coach, really appreciate you joining us. We thought we'd just start off with, what has this experience been like? Walk us behind the scenes of leading a professional team, the Red Wings, through COVID, preparing for a season. What has that been like?
Well, probably like a lot of people, it's been bizarre and unknown, and I'll start with kind of the bizarre. We were in Washington in March, and I don't have the exact date now, but it was like around March 10th. And we were getting ready to play the next day in Washington. And I remember at dinner with my staff, and we looked up to a TV, and we had saw the travel ban that President Trump had put in place, or some of the travel restrictions, I guess I should say. And at the same time, we heard about the NBA pausing their season or postponing their season. And so, it felt like something was imminent. The next morning, though, we didn't know, and we hadn't had word, and I knew our board of governors was meeting, but we went into the rink in Washington. I think the people at the rink basically said your game's canceled, but we had to prepare as if it wasn't. And we went through that day really unknown until about, I'd say noon or 1 o'clock. And at 1, I think we found out, and we were trying to make decisions on the fly. I think that's been the hardest parts about this for people in decision-making positions, is you're making decisions without a lot of information, and that gets extraordinarily difficult. And so, all you can do ultimately is make the best decision you can. And the conversations I had with Steve Yzerman at the time were, where do we fly to? Do we fly home? We were scheduled to play Tampa a few days later. Is this going to be a couple-day thing? Is this, I think both of us felt like it was going to be a longer-term thing, but we weren't certain. And ultimately, we flew home. And that just started a period of as I said, kind of a whole bunch of unknowns. We didn't know when we were going to get back together as a group. There was lots of talk, would we resume the regular season? And then as this thing kept playing out, would we resume? Would there be a playoff, and who would be included in the playoff? And there was moments where I went through weeks where I didn't think we were going to be included because of where we stood in the standings. And then I went through weeks where I thought we were going to come back and play. And so you're kind of getting prepared for the what ifs, and our players were in the same boat. And then as it turned out, our season was ultimately, ours was finished, and they brought 24 teams back in. And so at that point, we did some of the things virtually that we would do at the end of a normal season. At the end of every season, we have interviews with our players where, reviewing the season, talking to them about what we think they need to work on through the course of the summer, giving direction into next season, those types of things. And we did those via Zoom. And honestly, that part was great. Like, those meetings were probably as good as any meetings I've had with players because of two things, probably, or really one thing. It was away from the season a little bit longer than normal. Usually it's within days of your season ending, and there's a ton of emotion. And this kind of took the emotion out of it on both sides. And we were able to have really good talks with our players about, how their years went, get their input, and then give them some reality of what we thought. So we went through that, and now we've just kind of spent, a long message on this. We've just kind of continued to go with unknowns. We watched the NHL playoffs, and now we've been waiting to, it feels a little bit like it did at the beginning of this, where we don't know when we're going to start. We hope it's soon. We are kind of believing it's going to be certain time period, but we don't know for sure. So we're back into some of those unknowns of whatnot. But that's life, and that's where we're at today. And a lot of leaders are faced with this, and we're no different.
Would you say that you've gained some insight that you'd want to share with listeners of how you make decisions when you have really limited information? Because that is the reality everybody's confronting. How do you deal with that? What would you share?
Well, it's interesting. I both from my own situation and from observations and from talking to people that are in different leadership positions. My sister runs, I think, 2 or 3 counties of health departments up in the Traverse City area, and so she's basically the CEO of those health departments. And I've had a lot of conversations with her. You want to talk about having to make decisions without all the information. That's what the health industry's had to make. And it's very difficult. And especially when people are going to second guess those decisions, as what's going on right now. And believe me, I understand that in the position I'm in. And so, it's probably confirmed, if anything, to me, the understanding that all you can do as a leader is make the very best decision you have with the information you have at hand. That's all you can do. What you can't do is not make a decision. What you can't do is second guess your decisions. You have to look at the information, make the best decision you can, and then you have to continue to observe. And as information changes, you got to be all right with changing. You got to be all right with making those certain adjustments as that information changes, and being okay with that. And sometimes it's not easy, especially if the media is involved. Sometimes you get attacked for changing your point of view, but really you're not changing your point of view. You're adjusting to what the information you have, and not being afraid to make those decisions is critical. Making those decisions, and the only thing worse than a bad decision is making a decision where you're not committed to it. So commit to the decision, and then be ready to adjust, and be okay with that. Have a thick enough skin that you're comfortable with it, and be ready to adjust.
So in those decision-making moments, we talk about principal leadership in our center. Blash, what do you focus on as your leadership philosophies, or do you want to share some of those with our listeners? What do you fall back on when you're making those decisions as like your North Star, or how you lead people?
Yeah, I've always felt like one of the biggest things I think on leadership, coaching. I think coaching, there's an X's and O's portion of coaching, but it's really second. What we're in the business of people management. That's what we do more than anything else. And we manage our players. We manage our staff. You have to manage up to, whoever your bosses are. And that's no different in coaching. And so, I think the number one part of that is communication. And that's nothing new, but it is critical. And I think being able to have really direct and honest conversations is one of the first things that I try to do on an everyday basis. And sometimes that direct and honest conversation can be hard. And I try not to sugarcoat the information. I always feel like the people that you're dealing with want to hear and want to know where they stand. I say this all the time. Like, my job is to make sure that our players are on the path to greatness. And when they're on the path to greatness, I let them know. And when they're not on the path to greatness, I let them know that too. And, sometimes you can get caught in a rut where you let them know when they're not too often. And you got to remember to let them know when they are. You got to remember to catch them doing it right, so to speak. But that's the philosophy I've taken, and try to be as direct and honest as possible. Now, the other part of communication for me is I try never to be sarcastic. I try never to attack people personally. This probably happens more in coaching, I assume, than in business situations. But I just have always felt like the minute you use sarcasm, the minute you attack people personally, they get their guard up and they stop listening. And if the whole point of a direct and honest conversation is to get the information to people, if you end up attacking personally, you don't accomplish that mission. So that's one of the number one things that I think is that I fall back on, that I think is extremely important. It's about communication. It's about getting the most out of your people. I think that's the other thing that sometimes gets missed a little bit in coaching is, and this is all I know, guys. I'm not in business. I'm not in this is the leadership that I've had. And one thing I like to talk about whenever I talk to groups is I'm not going to try to pretend to be something I'm not. I'm a hockey coach, and I've learned lessons and gained perspective through that. And, one of the lessons that I've learned is our job ultimately is to get the most out of people. And in every situation, that's our job as a leader. Get the most out of the people we're leading. And there's lots of different ways to do that. And part of it has to be based on your own personality, but part of it has to be situation based. And sometimes that might mean being hard on people. Because there's more there. Sometimes it might mean being inspirational to people because you want to inspire them to the next level. Those are kind of two different ends of the spectrum, but they both can be effective in leadership, knowing that the end goal is to get the most out of your people.
So, Blash, here's a question for you. You've had tremendous success as a coach up through the ranks. You've now surrounded yourself and you've coached some of the best leaders in the game. You talk about Zetterberg, Datsuk. You're working with Steve Yzerman now. What lessons can you share that you've learned from some of those amazing leaders that you maybe picked up from them, or anything critical you want to share to some of our business leaders? Because those are pretty tremendous people you're surrounded by now.
I've been super lucky in my time. I was an assistant coach here when Nick Lindstrom was the captain. I got to coach Henrik Zetterberg as the captain. You mentioned Pavel Datsuk. I've, obviously had a chance to work with two Hall of Fame general managers in Ken Holland and Steve Yzerman, both outstanding leaders in their own right. I've got a good group of young leaders here, including Dylan Larkin, who I've had a chance to really watch lead as a young person. And, the one thing that I would say that each guy has that I think is really important in leadership is to be extremely comfortable in your own skin, to not be dismayed by mistakes, they all seem to have that growth mindset where when they make a mistake, they don't get super defensive. They don't get their back up. They also don't let their confidence get crushed. They just move on. They move on because they understand that that they're going to make mistakes. They're comfortable with that. They're not embarrassed by that whatsoever. And I think that's a really important thing that I've learned over time is that that's what great leaders do. They're not embarrassed by bad decisions. They're not embarrassed by mistakes they might make on the ice. They simply accept it. They learn from it and they get better. And when guys are in that spot, they can really do an unbelievable job of leading by example. And ultimately, that is probably the best part of leadership is leading by example. Certainly the communication skills I spoke of earlier are critical, but certainly the athletic field, especially as a player, leading by example is the most important.
All right, so one more question there. A lot of our leaders are going through probably that are listeners, some of the most disruptive time in their life. Mm-hmm. You are coaching one of the most storied franchises in the history of the NHL, and you've gone through not only COVID, but what could be one of the biggest turnovers in leadership and change in history. You talk about Holland leaving, Yzerman coming in, some of the higher family with the Illiches, some passing away there, which was a tragedy. How did you manage your way through that, or what lessons can you share of walking through that change, that transition, and still keeping your focus?
Well, I think there's probably two factors to that, because not only has there been lots of change, but we've gone through a period of struggle that last season before COVID hit, that was
I didn't want to bring that up, but
no, but that's life. And honestly, it was a huge challenge. It was the hardest challenge in my professional career, to coach and lead a team that had as little success as we had, that on a nightly basis, you think about this, like if you're in business, maybe you have quarterly marks where you get judged. We get judged on a almost every other night basis. And most of those judgments were poor. Most of those judgments, we failed. We did not accomplish our goal of winning the hockey game. And so, one part of how I handled that was I really tried to come in the next morning after games, being solution based. I think frustration is one of the biggest waste of human emotions. I don't think frustration accomplishes a single thing. Now, if that doesn't mean that we didn't have moments of frustration, we certainly had moments of frustration. But as a leader, I had to make sure that I got myself right before I addressed the team the next morning. I had to make sure that I walked in with not showing that level of frustration, and that we were simply being solution-based. And part of that solution-based, and this is something that I wasn't always great at, that I had to make sure I did a better job as we went through the season with, was looking for long-term solutions and not short-term fixes. And, I think as we went through last season and you're losing, you're trying to win the next game. And I actually had an assistant coach say to me, we got to stop trying to win the next game. We just got to get back to trying to win long term. And that's following great process that any of us totally believe in. But in the real world, when you're going through it, sometimes it's not hard or not easy. So every single day I had to get myself right. Every single day we had to walk in and try to be solution based and not let frustration get the best of us. I showed our guys one of the best books I've read on business, and it's been out there a long time. And I know it's, most people have read it, but it's the book Good to Great. I just really, that book, for whatever reason, really hit me. And I thought there was lots of great information in that. But the one thing that I could glean off that for last season was the Stockdale paradox, where Admiral Stockdale, one of the longest serving prisoners of war, one of the highest ranking officers, prisoners of war in Vietnam, and was asked about who survived those prison camps in Vietnam. And a lot of people would have said the optimists, and he's basically said, no, they died of a broken heart. And a lot of people, obviously I think the negative people died of no hope. the people who survived, to me, were the realists. They were the ones who would confront the brutal reality that was ahead of them today. And I thought that was important for us. Like, we couldn't pretend like we weren't going through a bad season. We were going to confront that brutal reality, but never losing hope that there's a better tomorrow, and that we were going to get through this and be better for it. And I really believe each one of us individually, if we took the right approach with that, which I think most of our guys did, we are better for it. So, that part of it was certainly challenging, guys, but it was, they're great lessons. And as a leader, it's easy to go through when things are great. When everything's, when you're winning all the time, leadership's easy. It's during those other times that are hard, and then, with that is the change. Last year was the first year that I worked for Steve, as opposed to Ken. And there's just differences. And they're both great, great hockey minds. They're both exceptional people and exceptional leaders. And I just think learning, how the communication is, the one thing for sure with both of them is I always knew where I stood. And that goes back to that lines of communication of being direct and honest. And with both Ken and Steve in their own way that they would present it, I always knew where I stood with both of them. And I always felt like we could have that good give and take back and forth.
So let's talk a little bit about the team and how you think about forging a team. Difficult season last season. How do you think about, we have a couple of questions around this, but how do you think about not just communication to individual players, but forging a team, a group, they're on a mission, a path to greatness? How do you think about forging a really high performing team as a coach?
Yeah, well, I would start, and this is something that is different in the NHL maybe than in college or junior. In junior hockey, when I coached before college, the roster turns over every other year. College, you're recruiting into that roster. The American League's a little bit different. I think all that always starts by getting the right people. And the one thing that I try to stress to our guys is, these are the types of people I want. You have to have these certain characteristics. And, I'm a big believer in character, but I also think that word gets thrown out there all the time. Like, what does character mean to you? I think it's important as a group to define what character means to you. And, when I went to Western Michigan and was the head coach there, Kathy Beauregard, the athletic director, asked me about that. I said, character is going to be extremely important to us. And she said, well, what does character mean to you? And so character for me was always getting people with inner drive. Like, I think inner drive is one of the biggest factors in individual success. So I wanted inner drive. I wanted people who were super competitive, who when the puck was dropped, they wanted to win that battle, whether it was practice at 9:30 in the morning on a Monday or Friday night in a game. I wanted people that were super competitive. I wanted people who had great perseverance, guys who, when they got knocked down, because if you're trying to do anything great in life, you're going to fail, which guys could get back up. And then I wanted people who had that confidence that they could handle failures and still keep their confidence. Those were the things we looked at in people. So I think that's number one. We got to make sure that we have the right people. The second part, and I've said this lots, like, winning probably in anything isn't really a magic solution. It's really, really simple. But it takes more attention to detail. It takes more day-to-day work than most people are willing to give. And so I just think, whether it's first taking over a team or whether it's coming off a bad season, this will be my 6th year. One of the things that's going to be extremely important is that we develop that understanding that it's the day-to-day work ethic. It's the day-to-day competitiveness. It's the day-to-day execution, and it's the day-to-day discipline. That's what matters. And if we do that on a day-to-day basis, that reality will show up in games over a long period of time. And so, there's not, again, to me, I don't have a lot of slogans. I have a couple things that I've had with every team I've ever coached that's been on our walls. But it's not a year-to-year slogan for me. That's not the way I've been. It's been, this is the approach. Let's make sure we stick to the approach. And if we do that, even though they're simple terms, they will produce good results with that type of process.
So on your teams, what's interesting, and Derek and I were as we were prepping, you're thinking of the similarities and what are the transferable lessons from hockey into business. And for a professional team, you have, you're selecting around character and some of those same core principles that each person has, but they're all different. And they're also, at different life stages. So it's interesting that you've got, older guys with families and kids, and you got, young guys who are, footloose and fancy free, and and they're just at a totally different wavelength. And that there's an analogy there with business, or connection with business, where you're trying to bring together these different generations to work together. Do you have any insight on how you think about that?
For sure. And I do think it's something that's really important. Like, I think camaraderie or your group is extremely important, and it's not always easy. The NHL is actually probably more difficult than any other level I've been at, because of the fact that it's such an everyday game schedule where you're playing every other day. You don't have a lot of time to necessarily get together away from the rink, not as much as you might in the American Hockey League or in college or in junior, where you build some of that camaraderie in different ways. I think trying to force that camaraderie is a difficult thing too. And you can do certain activities, and some of them can be successful, but the more organic they are, the more organic those situations are, the better chance that you're building that camaraderie. I think in the end, for me personally, just in the situations that I've been in with older players and younger players, is making sure that we all know that we have a common purpose, and what our common purpose is. Ultimately, we represent one of the greatest organizations in sports, and we have a purpose to make sure that we're doing everything possible to leave that jersey, when we leave this organization, leave that jersey in a better place. Now, that's not always easy, especially when you're in a down cycle like we've been in, but it doesn't mean that your approach changes that way. So trying to make sure that you bond the different ages of players, the different types of people that you have, which is certain with a common purpose, I think is extremely important.
Derek, do you want to do one more before we do rapid fire? Because I got one more if you don't.
Go ahead, do one more, and then we'll go rapid fire.
What are your hopes for the season? Tell us a little bit about what is you see as success, and what you want to get out of the season, where you're at right now.
Probably similar to what I talked about earlier. Success for me is, did we get better today? And so, like, when I walk off the ice in practice, and I take this personal, like, it's something that is extremely important. Like, did we get better as a hockey team today? And that starts with our coaching staff. Did we put in a place, a practice to help our group get better? Let's make sure we're accountable to each other. Were the drills, did they help us get better? Or did they drive us in the wrong direction? How did our players approach that practice? I'm a huge believer that greatness doesn't happen in one giant leap. And we're not going to go from being a team who had an extraordinarily bad season to all of a sudden this great team in one leap. It takes steps in the right direction. It takes as many steps in the right direction as possible with as few in the wrong direction. And so every single day, we got to just judge ourselves on, are we getting better? And when that day's over, it's a new day. And then we got to judge ourselves again. And I know that sounds simplistic, but it's reality to me. That is 100% the approach that we need to take. So what is success? I can't say that in terms of what our record will be. And that's not really my focus whatsoever. My focus is on day one of camp. When that day ends, are we a better hockey team? And then we'll move on from there.
Wonderful. So we're gonna end with some rapid fire questions. Are you ready to go?
We'll see.
All right.
Answers.
Favorite leader?
It's not very rapid, is it? Abraham Lincoln.
Courage or compassion?
Compassion.
Speed or accuracy?
Accuracy.
Great ideas or great execution?
Great execution.
A word to describe your leadership style?
Honest.
Night owl or early bird?
Night owl in an early bird world.
What's your biggest desire? A solid two-way forward or an offensive defenseman?
A combination of both.
All right. If you've got a dangerous jungle, it's a difficult task in front of you, and you're about ready to head into this jungle. If you could pick anyone to come with you, who you bring with you?
That's a tough question for me. The person most prepared to help.
Do you have a product that you would bring into a difficult jungle?
Not hairspray.
Oh, and then to close out, do you have an animal that would reflect and embody your leadership?
Never thought about that 1 second in my life, so no, I don't.
No animal. So okay, if you had to pick one, the one that comes to mind, Coach. What comes to mind? Your leadership animal.
I just a tiger popped in my head.
A tiger.
Tiger.
Just okay.
No idea why. Maybe attack. Like I do think like attack. So tiger.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, Coach, we really appreciate you joining us on The Jungle. Best of luck with the season ahead.
Yeah, it was awesome, guys. Thank you.